So, I'll greet you in Ojibwe. I'll say Buju, which means hello. My name is Taiomah. The name itself is actually Meskwaki. My name actually means bears whose voice makes rocks tremble. So it's a little bit of a sentence. And there's a lot of power that goes with names. So does anybody in here have a name that's hard to pronounce? Anybody have any relatives with a name that's hard to pronounce? Hey, there we go. So it's very important that, it's a beautiful thing when you have a name that's hard to pronounce, because I've been called Tacoma. I don't know where they got the C, things like that, probably the truck. I wish to have one day. But the names are sacred, and just like the names are sacred, we actually have a lot of content, a lot of things that belong to families. And so if you look at a lot of the artwork that I brought here, these are all designs that are based on indigenous patterns, specifically like Northern Plains and predominantly by the Great Lakes region. So we're looking at a lot of woodland design making. So the name of the show is Geo-Floral, and that was actually one of the things I wanted to communicate, was that idea of things that get passed along through traditions. And just like with our names, my sister's name is Tanoqua, which is also Meskwaki, and she's named from one of her great grandmothers. And then my brother Kinu, and then Gishig, the youngest one. Gishig's name is after a great relative of ours, Mino Gishig. So you see how the names kind of jump generations, and we actually have, as indigenous people, a lot of designs that will be passed down through family, and we incorporate it into our regalia making, whether we're putting it on panels on ribbon skirts or 4-paneled shirts, things that we would wear up at powwows and ceremony. So a lot of what I do is about reclaiming those stories and narratives. I like to do things that also modernize traditional art forms. So if you look behind you, I know rubberneck a little bit, these are actually on antique paper from the 1800s. So this is a art form known as ledger art. It is actually something that I teach. I actually do ledger art and narrative teaching. And it's something that's a very beautiful thing. And if you'll notice that these all have written words on them. And these are just spontaneous, like things that were sourced from Atchison, Kansas. I wasn't really playing into the idea of a narrative building through the content of the paper, but rather the idea of superimposing some of what I value over things that are physical. Like we have a lot of names here, a lot of things like that we incorporate. So as far as the design making goes, it's called Geo-Floral for a reason. We use a lot of floral designs, a lot of things that were observed, a lot of geometric designs. We would actually have a lot of non-representational as well as representational art. And a lot of what we do is actually based on what was around us. And one of the things I like to do is cyanotype. That's actually a form of printmaking I thoroughly enjoy because of its relationship with the sun. You're printing with sunlight. And if I'm making artwork that incorporates plants, it would just make more sense that if I'm going to print it, I would like to use that sunlight to kind of continue the little dialogue. So, hey. So if you're wondering about Warwick Clan is a local art collective comprised of me and my 2 younger brothers. A lot of what we like to do is focus on cultural narratives. We like to inspire young kids to produce artwork, those that are reconnecting to the culture. We kind of want to act as a bridge, because a lot of people will reconnect and they don't feel like there's a space for them because they've been removed for it. One of the things that I like to teach for indigenous people in any culture that's trying to reconnect to your roots, your story is just as valid. We didn't get to decide whether we were fostered out or if your family moved off the reserve or whatever. So what I like to teach is, just because you didn't have that proximity to the culture doesn't mean that you shouldn't pursue that or be interested in it. So I really advise people, young people especially, to learn about where you come from, pursue that, look at your textile patterns, because we're all looking for that sense of belonging. And belonging is actually something that is very, very much a part of why we do what we do. So if you look at our designs, you can tell those two on the end are Ojibwe patterns by the Great Lakes. We have designs that would denote what tribal affiliation you are, maybe even what your clan is and what family you belong to. All those things can be discerned through the graphical elements that we would wear on our sashes, our bandolier bags, things like that. Probably wondering what this is. This is actually a sketchbook of mine. It's graph paper. I do a lot of my design making through here. And so I'll do this with grids. The idea is that I have this, part of the reason I did printmaking is I'm such a perfectionist and I struggle with messing up. And with cyanotype, you can actually get it very close to perfect, but there's always going to be, the paper's going to do something, the medium might be expired or expiring, there might be some kind of component you don't have control over. So with that narrative of deliberate imperfections and my inner monologue of being a perfectionist, I try to abandon that. And so when I work in here, I won't use a ruler, I just freehand it, but I use the graph paper as a grid because I get really self-conscious about a lot of my design making. But at the same day, it's like, why should you be, that fell right at, ooh, you didn't see that. So I forgot I have these in here. This is actually from another project you'll see. So this is kind of a cool thing. So with our design making, you see a lot of geometric designs. These are butterfly designs. These are based on our Dakota style. So more specifically, I'm Ojibwe from by the Great Lakes by way of White Earth, Minnesota. I'm Pillager Band Ojibwe, Martin Clan. And then on my Dakota side, I'm from Sisseton, we're by Lake Traverse. And my bloodline actually comes from that. So I honor my bloodlines by depicting woodland florals that are Ojibwe, and I got some geometric designs that are based on our Dakota style. I'm also Meskwaki. This is why I got my Meskwaki t-shirt on, which is actually where my mom's from, which is Taiomah, Iowa. Does anybody know the difference between a reservation and a settlement? This is actually a very tough question here. So a settlement is actually very interesting. The reservations where we were pushed to during, westward encroachment and all of that conflict era. A settlement is actually when we sold everything we had to remove being, or to prevent being removed and put somewhere else. So a settlement was actually resisting the reservation, but it's still a reservation, still a sovereign entity, sovereign people. We actually have 4 reservations in the state of Kansas. Does anybody know? Can anybody name one of the reservations we have in Kansas? Okay, so we actually have Prairie Band Potawatomi, we have Kickapoos, Sac and Fox, and then we also have the Iowa people up near White Cloud, near Hiawatha. So it's actually a very powerful thing. And so part of what I do with these, this is actually something I call transposed ledger art. It's where I'll actually remove the ledger piece from the substrate that it's on. And it's kind of a dialogue about displacement or migration. There's actually a lot of things that you can infer about that. And so I like to use this, butterflies, they have those mass migrations and they travel. So I like to use that in my artwork, but also it's good medicine in that way. Because when I do my transposed ledgers, I'm gonna bring it with me sometime, but I'm actually working on a project that I do with community building, where I will have people create ledger animals, and then there will be a larger sheet of ledger paper that we'll actually put the artwork on after we cut them out. And that idea is that when we're removed from that substrate, we're leaving behind all of the comforts that we had, all the comfort, the identity that we had, and then we're existing in this new thing called, our community. But everybody comes from a different fabric, different thing, different experiences, and they're all valid. So I want people to feel belonging, even when they don't have anything that that resonates with them with other people, because we always feel like strangers even in our homeland. So that idea of community building, belonging and things like that, that's something I like to explore. Does anybody have any questions? Anything? There's no such thing as a dumb question, to be honest. Yeah.
Where do you get the ledgers for your ledger art?
So that's actually really cool. So I actually got really fortunate. There is a museum in Atchison, Kansas that reached out to us. And it was actually a very powerful thing because they were talking with Mona Cliff. She recommended some other artists and she's from the Lawrence area. So they got in contact with us through email saying, hey, we got a lot of ledger documents in this little storage thing that we're trying to get rid of, but we didn't want to just throw it out. We understand that natives do ledger art, so would you be interested? And I was like, yes, please. So we went up there, did a road trip, Atchison, and it's kind of serendipitous. I'm getting off track a little bit, but it's kind of serendipitous because I went to Earhart Environmental Magnet, and Atchison, Kansas is the birthplace of Amelia Earhart, if I remember. And the very same box that I had all the books in that I was carrying home, it wasn't until I got home that I realized it said Amelia Earhart on it. So I was like, it's kind of full circle. So, but if we don't get it from a direct line to a museum or a collector, we go to rummage sales, sales and things like that. We go to estate sales, we're looking for it. Sometimes we're trying to bid people on eBay. So it's whenever, but we also do commission work. So if you guys have any old documents, we do, my brother's actually really good at doing hyperrealism. His name's Kinu. And so we can actually do people's relatives and draw them up on the the document. And it's actually a very powerful thing to see when it happens. Yeah, any questions? Hey, yeah.
Can you explain the cyanotype process?
Oh, so how many of you guys are familiar with sun printing? Hey, now I can't remember the chemicals right off the top of my head, but they actually have these pre-synthesized papers you can pick up. I actually like to use my own chemistry, and you can order it wherever you want to go. It's really a fun thing. There's an A and B type of solution, and when they're combined, they actually become photosensitive, and so you actually have a couple hours to play with. And the idea is that you want a paper that's thick enough that can also hold water, so there's an actual washing process. You print with a stencil, so if I had a transparency, I like to create digital negatives, and then I'll print it out and make sure that's opaque, and then where those opaque areas are, it's actually going to be white. And so that's actually kind of what I was exploring with some of these studies, like these two right here, there's a positive and a negative. So I actually printed out two different stencils based on one of my designs, and all that white is what was blocked off. And all of the blue, that Prussian blue, that beautiful hue right there, that's where the sunlight actually goes through and activates the chemicals on the paper, and it will actually fix to the surface. And cyanotype printing has been around about as long as ledger art. When ledger art really kind of came into prominence towards the later half of the 19th century, there was actually about that same time as when cyanotypes were patented. And I can't remember off the top of my head actually who patented, but it's a really kind of cool thing. So when I do that, I actually do print on ledger documents. The problem is that paper's so old that it's kind of in like a slow state of like decomposition. A lot of the ink will like wash out. There's a lot of things that can happen with it. So to protect the integrity of the paper, I started doing more serigraphy, like silk screening, and these blackened out geometric designs back there are actually based. It's acrylic paint over the top of it. My goal was actually to have all of these done on ledgers, but the batch that I have, the paper I have, wasn't resilient enough for the medium. So, yeah. All right, you had a question?
Do you ever run into artist block? And if so, how do you work your way through it?
Oh, that's actually one of my favorite questions. So artist block is actually something I bump into quite a bit. My brother is actually working through that right now. And so sometimes you go back to the drawing board. One of the things I do is kind of like, how many of you guys have a bunch of friends do we have any artists in here? Okay, do you guys have like little groups that go to coffee shops and bounce ideas off each other? Sometimes. That's actually one of the most powerful things for me is working with other artists, because then I can see other ideas and their approaches. The other thing is, if you get artist block, try a medium that is foreign to you, something that makes you uncomfortable. Just experiment, fail. A lot of the best pieces come out through accidents and things like that. You find out what works, what doesn't work. Me printing on this watercolor paper came about because the ledger art was resistant to the medium. So then I started exploring not cyanotype, but serigraphy, like silk screening. And I like the way that sits a little bit more opaque on the paper. And so you just do that, you kind of go through it and explore. I collect a lot of art books. That's actually a very good vehicle for me. I got a lot of favorite artists. The other thing is, do a mural. Like if you're lucky and you got studio space or something like that, or if somebody offers you a chance, even if you don't feel 100% comfortable, take them up on that, figure it out as you go along. That's actually very powerful. This is my first mural I've ever done. I had the help of a phenomenal artist from Savannah, Georgia, who I collaborate with actively. Her name's Autumn Gary. And this was literally my first mural. And so this is actually kind of sitting here like, please don't look at it too closely, but it's amazing. And this is actually something that I'm wanting to do. So with that artist block is just go outside your comfort zone. Yeah. Hey, you got a question?
Was there a reason why you chose blue among the colors?
Actually, yeah. So this is kind of a cool thing. I'm glad you pointed that. So the reason this is blue, it's actually called Loyal Blue, I believe, is what we used, is because it's the closest thing to the cyanotype. So cyanotype usually comes in this color. It's in the name cyan. And there's actually a lot of different mediums. You can actually experiment with toning and bleaching. I actually selectively bleached some of these because there's actually some areas where the sunlight still went through the transparency, kind of cured a little bit on the surface. You can go up with like washing soda and you can selectively bleach out any flaws in your work. But the blue is actually kind of a staple. Like when you see blue, you think cyanotype. And I wanted something that would kind of reflect the overall narratives here that are depicted in the artwork. The other thing is I just like, it's funny, I like the sun to create art. I struggle with heat, but I do like sunlight, so there's good medicine in there as well. So photosynthesis, can't even say it, photosynthesis. Yeah. Hey, wow.
I got another one.
Yeah, what you got?
So when I was younger as an art student, I lived for color. The more color I could have, the better it was. And as I got older, I slowly started making myself I've worked back to black and white.
Yeah.
In your in your time as an artist, have you ever gotten to did you ever dabble in a lot of color? Or did you like that? Did you not like that?
Actually, I did a lot when I was younger, especially in high school. I used to draw a lot of monsters. I was listening to a lot of really abrasive music. I was kind of into hardcore, horrorcore, gangster rap, and then I was also listening to heavy metal, power violence, and things like that. So it kind of came with the territory of using a lot of color to emulate a lot of graphical elements that I saw in album art, things like that. But as I've gotten older, I've mellowed out a little bit. I'm actually kind of in the opposite boat. I'm wanting to go back to color. And so what I've been doing here, a lot of my designs, if you notice, they're silhouettes. A lot of these could be way more intricate. And so what I'm more interested in right now through artwork is exploring shape. And so I'm doing a lot of strong geometric shapes, a lot of black. I'm also going to be painting a lot of things in a flat black with a high gloss, just to have that contrast that's really subtle. But the overall thing that I focus on is the silhouette of the design. And then if I like that, then I can take it and then I can actually have somebody who knows how to do beadwork or loom work or something like that to explore it further. Because this actually came about through a happy accident. I was actually commissioned to come up with an applique design for a friend of mine who's from Taiomah, Iowa. And she's a scrub dancer. It's one of her woodland dance styles. And so she was needing one for her panel on the front of her ribbon skirt. So she tasked me with doing that. Her family last name's Snow. So I had to come up with a graphical element to reflect a snowflake in a woodland applique design that's usually based on flowers and florals and leaves. So things like that. So there's this idea of cutting things out, doing a lot of paper cutting, especially with our woodland tribes, the Ojibways. We had templates back in the day. We actually do a lot of paper cutting. We would take birch bark, thinly cut it, scrape it. There's a technique called birch bark biting, biting. And there's things that we would do. We would create a temple or a stencil that we would punch out and use that for some of our designs. And that's how you get applique patterns, textile patterns that get passed down through the generations. And so with the color, what are our family colors? We're Ojibwe, we're Meskwaki, we're Dakota. And each tribe uses different things, even with parfleche work. A lot of the parfleche work that you would see from the Dakotas uses a lot of yellows and blues. What we used was also based on what was available to us at the time. We have a famous thing called greasy yellow, the beads, and it was really prominent when those were being developed. There's also a blue bead that the Dakotas loved. So things like that. So color is something I want to get back to, but I still think my heavy contrast, black, the strong blue, I like high contrast still. So we'll see. Hey. All right, so I could talk a little bit about clans. So I mentioned I was Martin clan. So our art collective is called War Clan. Martins are actually one of the war clans for the Ojibwe. I'm also Thunder Clan, by way of my mom and things like that. So I actually forget how that works. It actually may not be because it might be through the father. I'll have to ask her. But there's a lot of clans that are in our families, and a lot of tribes have clan structures. We have band structures. For example, how many of you guys have heard of the Sioux, or what they call the Sioux? How many of you guys know that's Lakota? Okay. How many of you guys knew that was also Dakota? Did you know there's a difference between Lakota and Dakota? What if I told you there was a Nakota? Right? So it's kind of it's kind of a cool thing, because I said I was Sisseton on our Dakota side. My brother's significant other's, I believe she's Hunkpapa. She's Lakota. We're Dakota. We say things differently. So if we were to say Wopira, they would say Wopila. Things with an L, we say things with a D. And it's weird because there's a lot of things that get really complicated really fast with native identity. So again, how many of you have heard of the Iroquois? Or how many of you guys know that's actually 5 nations, now 6? So if somebody told me the Iroquois, they haven't told me much, because I don't know if you're Tuscarora, which was recently added, I believe, Cayuga, Seneca, Oneida, Mohawk. You know, the Haudenosaunee, that's what they call themselves. Like we say Anishinaabe on the Ojibwe side. So there's like a lot of complexity when it gets into that. And that's why a lot of these designs are so important, because you can tell somebody's clan, but you can also say, by looking at that Great Lakes region, they're probably one of the Three Fires Alliance. They're either Ottawa, Ojibwe, or Potawatomi. So, and we can do that. And so if you look at a lot of like the artwork, even with our ledger work, based on what we were depicting, you can infer with almost like a certainty the probability of this person's like tribal nation. So yeah, a lot of stuff though. So as far as like geometric designs, one thing that I'm actually wanting to explore further with my brother, because we do a lot of collaborative work, is quill work, so porcupine quills. A lot of our designs, before we had access to the glass beads that are so famous right now, we would actually have porcupine quills, and there was actually a way that we could stitch them together and make designs. You would do it with birch bark, you would do it with hide, rawhide, whatever you had. So there's a lot of things that I like to explore, and so this narrative of modernizing like traditional art forms is very valuable to me, because it's a lot of like self-exploration, but it helps get you into a mindset of working with what you have available. Art supplies get really expensive really fast. So anytime you can find a way that fits within your budget, fits within like what you're trying to do and communicate, especially if you're working with like the public and you want to do like community building exercises, it's really good to turn to things that are easily that can be replicated, things that you can actually do trial and error, and also facilitate that, something that you can teach people. So when you got an art form that you can teach other people, you know, through workshops, that's even more valuable, because you're going to bump into people that do something similar, and it gives you more opportunities to collaborate, to create, and just to be part and have that sense of belonging. It's kind of weird, sometimes I feel more at home within art circles than I do, you know, even with certain Native communities, because here in Wichita, we actually have so many different nations present. Got a lot of people that are Omahas, like a lot of Kiowas, Oto, Missouri tribe. You have people here that are Cherokee, Kansas, Wichita, you know, all these things. And very rarely will I bump into somebody who's Ojibwe or Dakota, who's one of my nations, but there's still that sense of belonging, you know, because we're like, there's this thing like when we go out, we're like one of the few races that actually looks for other natives. And so if we see somebody, there's kind of like that, like, you know, you just kind of nod, like, I see you. And we were like taught to look for other people, to seek belonging. So, yeah. Any other questions you guys have? Think really hard. This is you can ask an Indian anything at this today. There's not a bad question to ask. Hey, what you got?
What would be your favorite piece out of these?
Oh, that's tough actually. Because it's based on kind of like the potential that I could do with it. This is a very obvious one for me. Right now it's the mural. It was really fun. There's something very powerful about working with somebody that you really respect and care about. So whenever you work with friends and things like that, loved ones, relatives, there's always like this underlying energy that comes with it. And then when it goes big on a wall, this is literally the biggest piece I've ever done, and I've been wanting to go larger. These used to be my big pieces, because I would work on the small little documents there. That's actually a Scottish legal book. But the idea of going big is something that I'm really wanting to explore, so I would say this is my favorite piece. But compositionally, I'm leaning towards that zigzag pattern. That's the first time I've done something that is kind of in that zigzag, because I do a lot of things with symmetry, but perfect symmetry is very hard to find, like in the natural world. But there's so many things I can do with that, because part of what I'm wanting to do is I might actually modify that and incorporate it into some of my bead work, because I'm going to start dancing again. I grass dance. My brothers are also woodland traditional dancers. So we're looking for these graphical components that we can make. This is the Rutledge family. This is what our family's textile pattern, something that we can pass on to our nephews, pass on to like one of my brothers and all of them that have kids. Just things that this is the Rutledges. So, and eventually that might be my favorite piece. Dang.
Is there any sort of math involved in finding like the ratios of lines to curves, or how big something is, how straight, or?
Say that one more time, math involved?
Math involved in just the geometric part of it.
Yes.
The ratio of it, or?
So mine is the math of like, hey, just eyeballing it, you know? I actually do work, a lot of these, this is kind of that modernization I was talking about. Fortunately, I use software a lot of the time with my design making if I'm converting it to vector art for like a t-shirt graphic, sticker design, things like that. So a lot of that math is taken care of by like the computer that I use. When I'm doing things by hand here though, there's a little bit of math. Really simple, what I start doing is I'll measure out a design and then I'll decide this is how many squares long it is, this is how many squares right it is. So the idea of symmetry and having things kept at, within symmetry. One thing I've been learning the more I've worked digital though is that it's too perfect, right? And that's kind of my frustration with a lot of the digital stuff. I like the imperfections that make it human. That's one of the things I like to do is, there's this saying that we have that we don't buy our medicines, and it's kind of like with this new thing with AI art, with a lot of the digital art, things that are kind of popping up, this idea that when we would harvest our medicines back in the day, part of the medicine was gathered in the actual pursuit of that, fasting for it, learning how to use it, praying about it. When you harvest it, that's where you get your medicine's potency. You can just buy something, like we were not supposed to buy sweetgrass, we're not supposed to buy like sage bundles or anything like that. We harvest it because when you're harvesting, you're supposed to be thinking about the person that you want to help. You're supposed to care. So art's kind of the same way for me. And so like when I'm doing a lot of stuff with my art, it's more about like the design and things like that. But when I do digital stuff, it's like, it feels kind of like, with a lot of that stuff, when you're plugging in things and like algorithms and stuff like that, I won't use AI in my artwork for the sake of, we don't buy our medicines. I won't pass judgment on people that do use AI. If that speaks to you, do that. You can create that, incorporate that in your art making. But a lot of it's about being in the trenches and the struggle and the pursuit of finding what your art is and learning how to get better. Because when you have that human component, like this stuff that's super clean, it's beautiful, but it's not appealing to me. I like the things that have the imperfections. And that's why I like to do a lot of things there's a lot of things that I can approximate, a lot of things that I can kind of get it in the ideal direction. But at the end of the day, the chemical, the medium, a lot of that stuff's gonna do what it's gonna do. So my goal is actually to start doing more stuff by hand and going bigger. And so that's why I refuse to use a ruler in this with the design making that I do here. Because eventually my goal is to be doing this, because you can see how intricate it gets. Yeah, and so eventually my goal is to be able, I can do this. Because I'm extremely frustrated with my own stuff. And if it's like really off, then I'm like, I'm really discouraged. So, but yeah. But as for math, there's a lot of sacred geometry. There's a lot of like, people want to explore healing through frequency and things like that. If it's in my work and you see that, I love you for that. When I make my designs though, I'm focusing more on like the silhouette, more about like the plants and things like that. How can this be used? For example, those two pieces right there, that one is actually repurposed and recontextualized of the other one. It's the same design, I just rotated it, and I wanted to play with how they fit. And back to your question about what's your favorite piece, I'm leaning towards this one here. The design on that one, even though that one fits a lot better, so yeah. Any tricky questions? Anything you guys want to know that you too shy to ask? Be about, yeah.
Do you ever use like plants to make your colors?
I'm actually exploring that. I got a friend, she's actually one of the professors at WCU, Lori Santos, and I'm going to start working with her a little bit more on using natural pigments. That's actually a very awesome question because there's so much that could be explored in that, especially when we're doing floral components. We're already borrowing and observing wildlife. We might as well see that played out in the artwork through its entirety. And so that narrative of using natural pigments in combination with like sunlight, and things like that with the shapes and everything, there's this overall narrative, like the food web of sorts. You have photosynthesis, I can't even talk, even the substrates that we use. So it's a really cool thing because, longevity I'm not too concerned about when I'm playing with art. So I would love to explore more natural pigments because at some point everything came from the earth. So, yeah. Oh, you guys see this one? So, through these books, though, how many of you guys keep a sketchbook or an art journal? Right? Do you guys ever play with like dot graphs or graph papers? That might be a good idea for artist block, is play around with geometric designs. This one I don't like. But it's kind of based on like a Southwestern style. And I was doing this like, I'm not Southwestern, but we were trying to go back down to Santa Fe, so it was like on my mind, and so I just kind of explored different things. Also simple, like we use a lot of cross patterns in our work. These would have been typically done with porcupine quills. And so I'm coming up with templates in the process so my brother can use them for his regalia making. There is actually, these were some of my favorite florals here. These are based on our Dakota floral work right here. Those three on the bottom. So I wanted to go a little bit more obvious with the floral patterns that I use. I mean, you can see them in this design. What I'm doing here is a lot more contemporary. It's not based on any design in particular. These are actually just off the cuff, but a little bit more modern, a little bit more simple. So, yeah. Let's see. Also, when you run out of things to say, keeping a sketchbook's very powerful. So like this, for instance. Tattoo designs. I have 2 dragonflies, and it's a family tattoo. A lot of people have that, and it depends on what nation. Some nations didn't get tattoos or things like that. So what I also wanted to explore was designs for other people, because I'll have friends that, I mean, I've designed several community members' tattoos and things like that. So that's something I'm mindful of when I keep these. Where would it go? What would it look like on the anatomy? What kind of shapes do I want to explore? What kind of things are they needing? I try to keep it all within, you know, the realm of like just black silhouettes and things like that. But I do some just like pen and ink kind of things like that, just to explore. The idea is if it's super simple, I can scan it and then I can play and explore with different things, add colors to it. I usually do like a digital mock-up before I do something big. That's a lot more permanent, so yeah. Got a question?
What was the biggest struggle you had with going big? Because you mentioned this was your first time, so like what was the biggest struggle you faced?
So I'm more of a printmaker than a painter. Holding a brush is actually very scary for me. So going big, I was like, okay, it's gonna be so much easier to get more consistent lines, but when you start getting in, I found that my arms really get kind of wiggly. And then I start overthinking it. So then it's a simple thing, it starts becoming this. So I'm sitting here like, okay, let me sit. My hand gets all tingly and I'm like, shake it out, do it again. So I was very fortunate that my friend's a painter and she does really phenomenal stuff. And so we would actually work, like when I felt bold, I would try to do the detail work. When I started messing up, I'd pull off and she would clean it up. And so there's this dynamic of going through it. But going big actually is a lot easier than I thought, but also a lot more complicated at the same time. It just depends on what the issue is you're looking at the time. The biggest thing I didn't know was how many coats it takes. So when we were painting this, it was like, hey, we got to get this done. It was kind of like a last minute decision. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough art for the show. Let's paint a wall to fill up that space. So that happened, and look what happened. This is cool. Take pictures in front of it, please do. And then this is right here is based on our Dakota pattern. There's the Dakota star behind it, the 8-point star. Let me count 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 8. And then you also have some Dakota florals on the inside of that. So a lot of fun though. I'm definitely trying to do more murals. Coming up, one thing I've learned is that, like I said, how many artists in here are wanting to pursue this full time and make a career out of it? Yay. So one thing you gotta learn is if you're unsure and they ask you, still say yes, figure it out as you're doing it. The other thing I wasn't prepared for is just how busy you get. You do get really busy. Like right now, I have this show, I got a solo show coming up at Rutledge. I'm actually guest curating a show in Salina right now. I also found out that I got a show, another solo show in Andover at the Andover Library that I got to prepare for. And then I'm doing all these things and I got some workshops on top of it. And it's like, when you hit that ground running, always have volume, so always be playing. And that was kind of what the idea behind this show was. There's a lot of things that I wish I would have done a little bit differently, a little bit more perfect, you know, took my time on. I rushed through a lot of concepts to try to figure out what I wanted to put up and what would work well together. And so it's really cool because the idea is that I like the concept of galleries and exhibitions feeling like spaces that are lived in. That's why I actually didn't put some of these behind glass, is I wanted people to get up on it. You know, sometimes don't breathe on it, but sometimes if you're staying close enough, if you breathe, it'll kind of lift a little bit. So the idea is that you can be as close to it as you want and just kind of just don't scrutinize it too much, but please come up and look at it, because the idea is that this is actually, these are, I call them studies, these are concepts I'm playing with yet. Eventually, I'd love to see somebody that can bead that, and I can collaborate with somebody. I would actually like to kind of build an entire beaded satchel, or a bandolier bag is what we call it. That's actually something that's kind of unique to a lot of the Great Lakes stripes. A lot of medicines in that. This one's kind of based more on an applique concept. So we would actually cut a lot of things out. And so paper cutting is actually something I'm going to start playing with when I'm getting into applique, because eventually I'm going to teach myself how to sew. My brother can sew, my mom can sew, my sister can sew, we make regalia. I can't sew. So if I can find a way to incorporate that, maybe I can do like paper cut some of the ledger workout and then sew that onto other substrates, you know, or maybe I'd take the fabric and then I'd do that, make a long applique panel, just explore different things. And so this is setting me up for grander, greater things. A lot of things I want to explore. I'm going to make a lot of accidents along the way, but keep a sketchbook. That's like the biggest thing. So, any other questions?
Got time for one more.
Yeah. Hey.
So some of us are learning how to do printmaking this semester.
Mm.
What made you decide that you wanted to pursue printmaking over other forms?
I think it's because growing up, I've always been really insecure about my line work, right? One of the things I like to do is I work privately. So painting with somebody is a different experience. So I think that's why I got into printmaking, was that you can explore a lot of different types of lines, and you actually have a different kind of stability if you're using like block printing. What kind of printing are you getting into? Do you know yet?
We're doing relief next.
Yeah.
We did a lot of printing work.
Oh, so fun stuff. But you'll start, yeah. That's actually stuff I want to get back to. I do a lot of silk screening, like serigraphy. It sounds a lot nicer than saying I screen print. Cyanotype and things like that, because what I can do is I can take a design that I'm confident with, and before I commit to putting water or color on it, I can make a template and see what it would look like. And then I can go, a lot of this is actually it's waterproof when it's set. So you can come through and actually get watercolor, paint over your designs. The other thing is that idea of having like a background and then superimposing in a single instant. There's something about the process as well, like especially when you're using rolling, you know, like all the equipment that they have. There's just something kind of methodical about it, but also almost therapeutic. It's a very destructive process, but it's also very serene. Because you're literally doing subtractive, you're gouging, you're chiseling, you're doing things, you're also crushing stuff. If you're using plant matter and you're like making your own pigments, whatever, like art's a very beautiful thing. It's a very destructive process if you think about it, but you create something really beautiful in the process. So that's also the other thing I want to do, is not waste. So everything I mess up on, I will try to do something with. So I'm learning that. But yeah. Hey. All right.
That's great.
Well, thank you.
Questions,